On behalf of Trellance, we would like to welcome you all to this webinar titled A Benefit-Driven Approach to AI for Credit Unions. During the session, Dara Fitzpatrick, Trellance's Senior Vice President of Augmented Intelligence, will discuss how your credit union can be at the forefront of tech conversations by taking a benefit-driven approach to adopting AI. But before I jump in, I would like to go through a few housekeeping items. First, this webinar is being recorded and it will be made available to all after the session concludes. Second, due to the large audience, the phone lines have been muted. And lastly, we want to hear from you. There will be a Q&A at the end of the webinar. If you think of any questions during the duration of the webinar, please feel free to type them in the Q&A box and we will do our best to answer. If you have a question that does not get answered by the end of the webinar, please send our team an email at dfitzpatrick@trellance.com and we'll get back to you in a timely manner. You can also answer yes to the poll that was on the screen. It's not anymore. And one of our team members will reach out to you as soon as the webinar concludes. Thank you all again for being here for this webinar. And without further delay, here's Dara Fitzpatrick. Thanks. Take it away, Dara.
Thank you. I swear we did practice this, so of course.
Yeah, I think it's my microphone, but go ahead, take the lead, please.
We call it Murphy's Law. Thanks, Cassie, and thank you all for being here. I hope you were enjoying my favorite AI-generated picture while looking at it. I love looking at it. I think it's so smart the way that they did the squares, all generated by text, by prompt. So that's pretty cool. So we're going to get into a bit more credit union relevant AI topics. What is analytics AI, Gen AI, how can it benefit you, and how to get started. I'm going to go through three main bits, really. The first is upfront. We're going to sort of talk about the topic in general, just to get everybody sort of up to speed on where things are. The second one, I'm going to go through a bunch of use cases. I'm going to go through them quickly, but they are important because they are real use cases, and I think it'll certainly spark some ideas for you. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about sort of how AI can be rolled out at your credit union, how you maybe should be considering doing that, and how it fits into our movement in general. So this is my favorite tweet. Let's get going here. I'm not going to read it out, but you can see it's definitely a three-letter acronym heavy. And I presented this before and asked people if anybody knows what GPT stands for. And actually, it's quite funny because some people in our org have picked up GTP for some reason. But it means generative pre-trained transformer. But what does AI mean? And I have a cute little sort of toy that I have here put together because AI can mean different things to different people. So I'm going to give this a spin. Let's see what it says. AI additive intelligence. Let's try one more. And you may have noted that I was introduced as SVP of augmented intelligence. That's how I look at it, and I'll explain that a little bit. Advanced intellect. Also good. So you get an idea here. Alien intuition, also fantastic. But AI is all of these things in my perspective. It is artificial, but it also can be very alien, be added, it can be augmented. So that to me is AI. But let's go through a few actual terms here to get us back onto the topic. So what we talk about in the press and OpenAI and what they're trying to achieve is something called AGI, or general intelligence. It's where a robot, and we're talking like Hollywood at the moment still, but where a robot can pull together a whole bunch of things. The example I would give is, if a robot could go into a friend's house and make a cup of coffee all by itself, it could work out where the milk was, and if they had a espresso machine, it could work out how to do that. And it's very general, a lot of very general skills. We're not there yet. OpenAI says they're trying to get it to do that in the next year or two. I think they're going to do something called agents, which is chaining things together first. But true AGI, the stuff of the movies, is quite a ways out yet. But we're working with something called ANI, or narrow intelligence right now. And you see here that I explained some of the other things. Gen AI is generating text usually from data. LLM, large language model, interprets text and turns it into tokens or something that data that can be used. So they pair very nicely with each other. Natural language processing is an older term for LLM, which meant taking plain language and then turning it into data. And you would use that with maybe an OCR system. You have ML, machine learning, and predictive analytics. So machine learning is where the machine could iteratively improve upon its own model, which is built upon predictive analytics. So you can see it sort of has stacked up there to what where AI is today. So it means we've been in the age of AI for quite a while. ChatGPT, the version that we were all familiar with, it's only really been out a couple of years, and it obviously was a huge deal. But I wanted to sort of lay out here that we've had all of these other forms of artificial intelligence or artificial decision making for quite a while. If you have Siri or Google or Roomba, you have AI right now. If you have tools from vendors such as fraud tools, they already will have AI built in. So you actually are living in the age of AI already. Gen AI has sort of really pushed that recently because it was such an incredible success. And it was because it was a tool that was usually the realm of like the Deutsche Banks and the Chases of the world. It was made available to us in our pockets. And so they've been using chatbots for quite a while. And that's the basis of ChatGPT, is to have those chatbots. You might have them on your websites already, but the big deal is that it is made available to everybody. So what I show here is that small companies like credit unions, which are normally, a few iterations behind the big banks or the investment banks anyway, finally have a chance to do this and do this themselves. So your IT department can now do this. You don't have to buy a chatbot from a vendor or go out there and get something within other financial risk or marketing models. So it's now open source, scalable. You can sign up for Microsoft Azure, AWS, or Google Cloud and get artificial intelligence and the GPT tools right there. It's new. There are new approaches for sure. But these are the things that big companies have been doing for a while. And now the big deal is that we all get to do it. And that's kind of cool. I wanted to point out too that the other piece that's sort of new as we think about this is that the revelation of ChatGPT really brought us into the realm of thinking of AI as something that can make decisions by itself. And again, arguably, it has been making decisions, underwriting, for example, but also that it can be creative. And so it's very good at making things look like they're unique and they're true. I would contend that it's basically processing other people's work, but it's certainly something new and something that has changed the way that we even search for information on the internet now. So let's get into, these are high level use cases that I think we're going to share this with you. So you'll have these to reference later. But I wanted to bring in some real surveys here as well. So this one is from The Economist. And this asked to what extent an organization uses AI. And you can see fraud detection, number one. It's been there. It's been used for quite a while. Optimizing IT, big banks in particular, big organizations have been able to use AI to understand their IT systems and when they may fail. So when an ATM network may be giving signs of going down, it can use AI to do that. Digital marketing, segmentation, next best product. So all great examples. So, and again, you may have access to these already because your vendors have made them available to you. But if you wanted to, now you can do it yourself. Here's an example pulled together because really, like I said, the newest thing is this whole LLM and Gen AI, and I wanted to get into that for a minute because we can do this now. We can chain these things together ourselves. This is a very interesting use case. So what this is about financial distress. The idea is, how do I tell a member is in trouble and how do I deal with that? And of course, using this, how do I automate my process around that? So this shows bringing in unstructured data. Maybe it's a conversation held in a call center where the member may have shared some details about difficulty paying bills or losing a job or something like that, and they may have said that, and that's been turned into text, and then it goes into a large language model that then says, oh, this member's not happy, and the reason they're not happy is they're having financial stress. So you can take that and that data about that interaction or about any of the interactions, right? Email, anything. And then bring that together with structured data. So structured data is, for example, sitting right in your core. So maybe you're seeing something around the days past due on credit cards. Maybe there's something in there about their balances are starting to erode. So you bring those two together, the large language model, turning it into data, and the structured data from the core, and then you pull those both into a predictive model. The predictive model says, if I see this and this and this and this happening, uh-oh, that member's probably in trouble, and we should reach out to them. Now, of course, we're not going to big brother the whole thing and say, oh, hey, it seems like you blew all your money at the boat last night, so let's talk about education. No, you're going to be a little bit more sensitive about it, but you could put a Gen AI in place that would then take that, and then so for those members that are showing sign of distress, you can generate some text and maybe has something a little bit specific to them, and you can also generate an image in there. So Gen AI is really good at generating those two things. So it's taking data and turning it into something that's a bit more human consumable. There's two fundamental flaws with this. We can't do it. And the reason is, the two reasons are regulations. So we've got to make sure that we're compliant and that we're not treating members unfairly. And the second thing is member experience or quality. We've got to make sure that we're saying things appropriately and making the member feel seen and heard, but not be super specific in there. And you've got to be very careful. You don't want to automate this. So because of that, we would probably not automate this for quite a while. And any credit unions I've talked to that are using this certainly keep what we call human in the loop. But here's the other interesting twist on this that I did want to bring out is there are bad actors out there who can do things like this because they don't care about regulations and experience. They will pump things out and just automate it as much as they can to try and conduct fraud. So let me move on here into another survey, again from The Economist. This one talks about the greatest risks to the organization. So it sort of plays on that sort of idea before that we can't fully automate it. So security and privacy breaches, maybe because external actors are using AI to try and breach us. Failure of AI systems, making bad decisions or decisions that are not appropriate. Legal responsibility. So these are pretty common things. Workforce displacement is a topic that comes up a lot. And again, I see it as augmentation, taking us out of the low value interactions and allowing us to focus on high value interactions. So I think that's a really big deal as well. I wanted to say one other thing here too is there are other risks to AI, and this does talk more to the sort of general intelligence, but I think it's worth considering that as we put artificial intelligence into a place where it can make those decisions, it can be creative, we're giving a certain amount of control to it. And I'll bring this up a couple of times again, but some things you got to consider. Last June, for example, it was an artificial intelligence that decided to scratch a space launch, and it took NASA a while to work out why. So it scratched it, and it made the decision, and then we had to go back and understand why it made that decision. So that was important. I think it's interesting that Mark Zuckerberg, even though he's the head of Facebook, is not actually able to turn off Facebook. He could never actually turn it off. There are too many people that are reliant on it. His business is reliant on it. But we put ourselves into positions where we may compromise ourselves by handing over or ceding some of this control. In our own cases, that means thinking about redlining. It means thinking about bias. It means thinking about unexpected results. So there's a famous example. If you asked AI to catch all the fish in a lake, it's not going to throw out fishing lines. What it's going to do is it's going to empty the lake of all water. it got to the solution, but it took a very novel approach that we weren't expecting because it works outside of our normal context. So I think that's a sort of an interesting thing, and I'm going to sort of harp on this warning a little bit more as we go on. And so the questions that we have as we're doing this is, as we're doing this, will we have the same scrutiny on this as maybe the NCUA will have? Here's an example of some areas where we're already using artificial intelligence. This one came from the financial brand. And so obviously chatbots, KYC, AML, anti-fraud, these are very expected areas. Now, I want to jump into something different. And Cassie, we're going to throw up the poll here while I'm playing some audio. Okay, so if you guys listen carefully.
Thank you for calling Coastal. This is Tiffany. How may I help you?
Yes, I called. I'm trying to use my card. It says call at this number.
Do you have your account number, your card number?
Yes, my account number.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, it's 613-996-0004.
And where were you trying to attempt to use your card when it declined?
I'm trying to use my card.
I'm sorry.
Persetuense Yankee. That's the company name.
Okay. And the transaction amount?
2,000 and I think it's $38 or $35.
Okay, we get the results up. Question was, which side of the conversation was AI? That's a real call. Member, call center rep, both. Well, I give it to the members. Well done. The call center rep, we wish. Both. That's it. I think that I threw that in there just to catch you guys out. But yeah, it was indeed the member. It was a real call, fraudulent. What had happened was this call happened. The charge was processed, and then the member called up and said, "Why is this charge on my card?" The VP called back the member and said, "Well, we've got this recording of you." She very promptly said, "That wasn't me." And so he apologized, went back, put that recording through. There's like these AI screener things that can tell you whether it was 93% probability that it was deep faked. And so he called back the member and said, he cured everything, obviously, apologized, and said, what might have happened here? How could this have happened? She said that she got a very strange call a couple of weeks before that, and it asked her these weird questions, and she got so frustrated she hung up. So then the charge got put through. The fraudster authenticated into her account, the call center, and then obviously played that based on her voice print with the information. And you could tell there are a few they've seeded in. They threw in a few things in there to make it sound real, and it sounded like there was static on the line, but they were just fudging certain information, and so it was a deep fake. And that, back to my point, it's like they can make hundreds or thousands of these calls a day to any number of credit unions, and they just pump it out until a few of them hit. So just like trying to do any regular credit card or ATM scam, they keep hitting until they catch a few. And so it worked in this case. And obviously, we learned a lot about this. I'm glad to be able to share this with you. So you may learn about this, but I'm sure all of you by this stage have put in some form of multi-factor authentication in place so that things like this cannot happen. And it would have texted the member to make sure that it was her on the line. So but interesting. Again, an interesting case of they don't care about regulations. They don't care about quality. They just want to pump out this stuff. So thank you for playing. back to the deck here. So as I said, like any tool, AI can be used for good or bad. And I have a kid playing hockey. It's a highly regulated sport because we want to balance fun with safety. Um, I don't know if you've ever been to a high school hockey game, but you've got two competing mobs of teenagers that are really worked up and have taken a lot of caffeine, and you basically put a weapon in their hands. So that's why the hockey rule book is about 400 pages long and reads like a script for 1,000 ways to die on ice. But the point here is that we have regulations in place. I've talked to some people at America's credit unions, and the sort of perspective on this topic is that the regulations that are already there are general enough to cover for artificial intelligence. We just need to make sure that we are continuing to be compliant and think about these things in the right ways. And so the industry is prepared to do this. It's a novel approach, but we're definitely, we're definitely in a good place as long as we continue looking out for those things. I love that hockey example. So I'm going to go into some use cases here. So shifting from what it is and some perspectives of mine into actual real world examples. All of these are running. And if you're interested in seeing more and actually seeing how these work and interacting with them, just let me know and we can certainly set up some time with you. I'll point out the other key thing too is like why Trellis is really big on this. And we really, the big deal for us is you need good data to do all this. I didn't really mention that before, but as I talked about taking data and digitizing it, putting into from you've got your large language models and LLMs and the natural language processing that turns it into data that you can use and mix that with the data from the core. That's a lot of what we do, right? It's taking that data, and your AI is only going to be as good as the data that it runs on. So here's some examples of how that works. So first one here is just predictions. It's doing segmentation and propensity analysis, like next best product, and be able to put that into the member profile. So you get a better idea of the member and what their needs may be. An example of transaction coding. So you've got the ACH transactions, credit card transactions. It'd be nice to know if that shows, again, signs of stress. Maybe those transactions are paying off a payday lender. Maybe the members have certain affinities in a seg. They may have affinities to a certain church or school or charity. You can see things in there like deposits from Social Security. But the data is pretty dirty. You have to go in there and you have to code it in a sense that you know what type of transaction. So maybe it's going to Volkswagen, maybe it says VW credit, but you know that that's an auto lender and it's Volkswagen auto loans. And so that's what this would do, is actually uses AI to decode those descriptions into things that you can actually work with. Another example, I talked about regulations. This is the flip side of that. We have a GPT that will actually look at the regulations, and then you can ask it questions like a conversation with a regulatory expert, which I think is kind of cool because people in that area are always very, very, very busy. So it's good that you can do this. And we specifically pointed this to sources. We curated the sources, so it only went to official sources. But you can ask very interesting things about CECL, for example, or a credit line increase, or we did one on a credit card at the top interest rate allowable for cards by state. But not only will it bring you back answers specific about the regulations, you can also ask it questions like, how would I set up a CECL program, or what do I need to do about open banking right now? And it can actually bring that back. So it's a lot more than just the regulations itself. It can actually bring back ideas about how to set up a program, which I think is cool. Moving on, data-driven scripts. So using the information that you know about the member and then generating a script for your frontline staff so that they can bring up those points. In this case, thanking them for being a member for 12 years, telling them that they qualified for a credit line increase, offering them a student loan program and a share certificate. But not only sort of taking that and putting it up, but also doing it in a way that's nice and consistent and it's compliant as well. So you can put pointers in here to say this, but say it mentioning, for example, the different channels that the member could contact you in. Say this, but make sure you don't mention certain things. So make sure that it adheres to policy, which I think is kind of cool. I don't mean to say it's kind of cool after every one of these, but I do actually think each one of them is cool in its own right. Here's another one, field of membership. So looking at, geographic areas, be it tracts or zip codes, and looking for members that look kind of like your members. So it takes the idea of segmentation one step further and says, if you're considering moving a branch into that zip code, here's how close those members look to your existing membership. Got a couple of examples smattered in here, which are available to you today if you are already a Microsoft customer and you use something called Power BI. This one's Q&A, and what it does is it allows you to ask questions in plain English. So you don't need to know SQL, it's a structured query language, the language of databases. You just ask your question in plain English, and it brings back not only the answer, but it'll actually turn into a visual for you as well. So in terms of exploring your data and just being able to pull up quick visuals, it's much, much quicker. I actually put it up against myself. I'm pretty good at Excel, but I wasn't able to do a pivot table and pivot chart anywhere close to as quick as this thing could. So, so I thought that was pretty cool. Member interactions here is an example. And so this is, as I mentioned before, you can create scripts for your frontline staff as they're talking to members and make sure that they're compliant. You can also listen to these interactions or bring in the interactions from maybe a chat or emails, and then use, again, the natural language processing and large language models to divine information out of them, and also to make sure that your staff are being compliant. So this was done during COVID, and we asked, what are the most common sources of fraud? Zelle, obvious, but the other one that wasn't obvious is puppy selling scams. So it turned out that credit union, when you dig into the data, you go behind this and you use the cited sources. It turned out that a lot of members had called up because they were being caught by these puppy selling scams. They would, pay by Zelle, and then they would go off and try and pick up the puppy somewhere, and the farm didn't exist. So, but again, in terms of being able to listen to your members, this is really key. And there's a lot of insights that you'd never know otherwise, unless you sat down and read every single thing, or, asked your call center, your frontline staff to actually, tell you what they're hearing, and they would bring this up. Another example from Power BI, this is called Copilot. And so if you're a couple of slides ago, there was one where it turned your written question into a data query and then brought back a visual. This flips it the other way. This is more Gen AI in terms of taking data and turning it into a narrative. And it will do some of the digging down and the drill throughs that you might have to do manually, but you can start asking it questions, and it brings back, again, more of a reason behind the numbers as far as it can divine from what it sees. So it's a much sort of, it's a different way of looking at it, but it attempts to build a narrative rather than asking the question directly. Here's one. Publicly available 5300 data is, it's a treasure trove of information. What if you could ask it how you're performing with your peers? What if it was smart enough to work out who your peers actually are, and then come back with, some specific, comparing you to others with specific metrics, but then also, just like the regulatory example, not only tells you, but it will actually make suggestions as to how to improve upon those metrics as well. This is a common one, and if you have a document management system in your credit union, you may ask if it has this capability. The newest version of it has this capability, but you can ask questions of documentation. So if you have, I don't know, procedure books or whatever, it can actually, you can ask it again a plain question, and it'll come back with the documents in your credit union that have that may mention that, or it'll also again take it and turn it into something that's more consumable. The question I often get as I'm going through these use cases is about privacy and security and keeping that data within the walls of your credit union. And so this is one of the things that was tackled very early on, is when you can use the open AI version of ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity, these AIs, but you have to be very cognizant, and anyone within your organization should be aware that anything you type into them is then used to train models from that point forward, meaning it goes into the public domain. But Azure, for example, gives you an OpenAI private version where the data is guaranteed only to stay within your area, your subscription, as they call it, and it doesn't leak out. So that's one thing I would say to you, is be careful whenever you're interacting with these, and make sure that anybody in your organization who is aware that nothing that is you don't want to share with the world should go into a public version of these. You have to subscribe to the private version, and that only then is it safe to actually start training it on your own data. Okay, that was a bit of a sprint, and thank you. I want to get through all of them. We have limited time, so but I did want to finish up on this one. This is a letter that I wrote, and I want to ask all of you, please, 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 if you know my family, do not ever bring this up. But my daughter's name is Stella. She got the Gold Star Award. It's like the Eagle Scout version for Girl Scouts, and my wife asked me to write a letter, and of course, you know, me being me, I decided to ask AI to help out, to augment me, and so it wrote this letter. And I gave it just a few facts to get in there, and it, even if you can see the bottom, it says, "Keep shooting for the stars, our amazing daughter," and her name's Stella. And yeah, I think you can guess where this is going. My wife cried, and I didn't have the heart to tell her that I didn't write it myself, but I thought it was very good, and I wanted to share that with you. But please don't tell her. Okay, so those were the use cases, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the sort of our approach to it, how we can actually do some of this ourselves within our organizations. I like bringing up this little cartoon here. It's a novel approach, as I think you've heard me say a couple of times, but if it's a hard problem, it's still a hard problem. You're still going to have to think about how to do this. And because it's novel, it can go wrong in very interesting ways. So that's my little cartoon, and this is a little bit more useful. So the challenges that you'll see are hype and distraction. You're getting all these things in your mailbox about what AI can and can't do. Novel financial crime we covered. Skills and talent as a new tool. It will need people who know how to use those tools. You don't want to be the guy at Home Depot who's missing a couple of fingers asking for a new saw. You need good data. I mentioned that before. It's only as good as the data it runs on, right? And I've heard like this interesting things about synthesizing data. They've got limitations that you need to understand. You need to think about your suitable use cases. I've given you a few ideas here, and certainly if you want to throw some in the chat, I'd be happy to talk about a couple of others you may have in mind. You think about data protection. I cover the private versus public. You don't want to do any useless projects, so keep an eye. I mean, this is still like a business tool, right? So you still want to get business value out of it. So think about the projects you want to do, and very importantly, you know, as well as the quality for your member services, you also want to remain compliant as well. And the interesting twist here is that bias can sort of seep in. So all those challenges, if you have somebody that can understand these, you basically, all I'm saying is you still need to have a human in the loop to have some oversight here. Much like any other new thing that you're rolling out at the credit union, particularly technology oriented, we recommend an agile approach. And so that means thinking strategically, like what overall you want to do, what change you're trying to make, and have a vision. But then think about the first thing that you want to do, the minimum viable product, the MVP. So you want to like a nice solid foundation, have a small project that will prove the point and help you learn, test and learn, fail fast, as they say, and then start scaling out business use case by business use case. And then as you do this, you just continue thinking about the business outcome and delivering value incrementally and strategically. So you're probably going to be asked by the board at some point, or your executives, what are we doing about this AI thing? And so I think if you sort of take that approach, you think big, you think strategically what you're trying to do, and have like at least have a position. And hopefully some of the stuff I've shared with you today helps you form your own position on this. But think big, start small, and then deliver incrementally. Some things to call out here is you probably need to think about that data. So convene a data council if you haven't already. Think about your vendors, what ones are using data and AI. Maybe you could leverage that in some way. When you're starting, I like to find a white knight, an eager intern, or somebody who's like jazzed about this, is willing to stay up until 2 o'clock in the morning reading about it and really dig into it. So find somebody like that you can use their energy to propel this forward. Consider partners for capacity as well as capability, credibility. You can invite partners in to talk to your boards about their perspective on things as well. And then, consider, like I said, deliver that value incrementally. So piece by piece by piece, hoard the data, measure the business value, but always make sure you got that oversight and governance. So I have one more poll, which is, Cassie, if you want to throw it up there. This has surprised me, this poll. I've been surprised by well, let's see what it comes back with, and let's try and interpret the data as it comes in. And while you're doing the poll, Cassie, can I change my slide?
Yep, you can change your slide as long as I can have the poll up, no worries.
Okay, yeah. So I hope this is visible, and maybe you've answered already, but I think I love cartoons that talk about this stuff. And one is, this is a pretty funny one. It's AI turns a single bullet point into a long email I can pretend I wrote. And then at the other end, it's somebody who who takes that long email and pretends that they read it by just making it into one bullet point. So I think that's a little bit of humor there, a little bit of AI humor. Okay, Cassie, do we have an answer? There we go. So, we do have percentages on here. So about a quarter of people haven't started yet. 40% have probably, you're starting off with one project and just going into it a little bit. And that's a great place to start. And then this is what surprised me. So 2 out of 31 are spending more than $250,000 on AI. And I assume that a large proportion of that is dedicated to working with a company like Zest.ai. And that's fine as long as you're learning from it as well. And so that's really nice to see that people are getting. Okay, so I showed you this little cartoon, but it was going somewhere, I promise. And here's I'm getting a mention that the internet connection is unstable. So Cassie, can you give me an audio confirmation that we're still live?
Yep, and I hear and see you just fine.
Thank you. So obviously the image on the right is AI generated. And this is how I feel about AI. If you just want to shove protein and carbs down your mouth, then that's perfect meal. But if you actually want like meaning out of it and you want to enjoy it, and it's something that people are willing to pay for, then you will go for the real meal that's on the left-hand side. But, sometimes we don't have time. We're rushing to a hockey practice and you've got to stop off and have fast food. So they both have places, but they both have their own type of value as well. And that's the way that I look at this. And as I said right at the outset about augmented intelligence, the way that I look at AI is that it allows us to focus on the high value interactions and high value activities, and we can delegate the low value or high volume transactions to an AI. An example I love to give is if you're using member segmentation, you can take that segmentation to then work out the next best product. And then the very top ones, maybe you got 50 members that are most likely to sign up for that one product. You can take the time to call them and get on the phone with them. And then the next tier down, maybe they get a personal email or a mailing, which is expensive these days. And then as you go down the tiers, you can do that. So the same thing with AI. Like once you're down that long tail, you can sort of delegate that. Again, making sure it's quality and compliant, but you can start delegating that stuff off, and while we can focus on the things that are the big deals. So AI is like it's processed, low nutrition, high volume, as opposed to the gourmet meal. Now, this sort of gets me to one thing, and I meant like about the credit union movement and how this fits in, because I'm looking around and I see the big banks. We had a very nice branch for Chase locally, and they turned it into private banking. And they have ITMs that they put in another place. It's literally under a water tower. And so drive up ITM. But this is where I think the credit unions have an opportunity, because we don't care about driving costs down as much as they do, because we're not beholden to shareholders. And we do care a lot about service to our members. And we care a lot about environmental and social topics as well, which is, as they're working very hard to push as much things into AI as they can, we can think about a balance and think about how we want to treat the members and have the AI help us with that for sure. But we can provide a more human face to our credit union members. And I think that is going to be very distinguishing for us as we move forward. We've got to do everything right. We've got to compete. We've got to have the lower costs. We certainly need to use this as a tool, but I do think that they are doing themselves and their customers a disservice by pushing so much over to automation. We've all been on the phone and banged on the zero key so we could get through to a human. I think we're going to see that. I think we're already seeing certain backlash in the way that people are talking about the general intelligence and not wanting to give everything over to it. So I think that credit unions have a real opportunity here in an kind of ironic way, honestly, to use AI as not only take advantage of it, but also use it as a differentiator in how we choose to use it. So some takeaways: manage data as an asset, because now you can get more value out of it. Plan the use cases to attack. Build, and in some cases buy the experience. Execute, fail fast and learn, and apply judiciously. Keep human in the loop. Think about the compliance side of it. Think about the member services side of it, and that's how I think we can move forward. So this is the end of my piece, and I think we have some questions, and hopefully we have some time to cover them. Yeah, we have 10 minutes. So Cassie, do you want to jump over to the question part?
Yeah, of course. So now now is the time to ask questions. So you can either type them into the chat box, or there is a Q&A box that you can go ahead and put them in as well. Starting off, Dara, Tad has already asked us a question, and I'm sure you can probably see it in your chat too, but Tad wants to know, does the Copilot in Power BI require a specific data structure behind the scenes? And then he says, in fact, do the other products require specific behind the scenes work?
That's a great question. Hi, Tad. I know Tad from Royal and Dubuque. Nice to see you on here. Great question. Yes, as with anything that we do here, the data is critical, and organizing the data in a way that it can be processed is also very important. So I'm trying to think of a good example here, but so we call them members. Everybody else calls them customers, right? So that's one thing where you even go into you sort of pull in the synonyms, and you'll want to train it on synonyms. So You also want to tell it sometimes when it's looking at something that is like a financial metric versus a service metric. It may not know that, and the data that you have in there in the database, because it's called field CU_15789, like it has no idea what that field name actually means. So it is important to give it that. But once it has a good field name, it actually is pretty smart from that point forward. The other products that I mentioned also, there's for the Gen AI ones, you're doing some prompt engineering and you're pointing at the right sources. Like I said, we curated the one for regulatory, and you definitely want to sort of test it, give it a few runs. But I got to be honest with you, the regulatory one using public data, we set up in a matter of hours. It wasn't a huge deal, and it was about getting the prompts right and about using the technology and making sure that the UI looked good. So there's work here. These things are not magic.
Oh, can you hear me
Cassie,
now?
any other questions?
Yeah, thanks, Dara, for answering that for Tad. Somebody's asking how they can manage their board members' expectations on AI.
Another great question. I think I would start with having a position, even if the position is it's not the right time or we're waiting things, we're in a waiting stage right now. But they may come in with all sorts of, again, they'll be reading the hype and they'll be distracted by certain things. But I would, some of the things I've shared with you, the fears that we have, we're already starting to manage. The things that could go wrong are already covered by regulations in many cases. If you're starting off, and then of course give them an update on where we are, but that position could be we're waiting and seeing for the moment. Okay, Cassie.
Oh, once again, I don't know what's happening with my mic compared to Zoom. I'm over here talking away.
Yeah.
I simply don't know. But thank you, Dara, for answering that one. Julia is asking us a question. They're asking, when looking at AI from a risk perspective, what do you feel is the greatest risk right now? They said they've already identified compliance risk, reputation risk, and well, I think we put reputation risk there. But are there any others?
The greatest risk, I think, is the one I gave the example of, which is I don't know if you'd call it operational risk or just a general risk, but the risk of loss is a big one, and that's one where we can't wait, because it's, as you all know, it's a Cold War, and every time they come up with a new weapon, we've got to come up with a new defense. And so I think that is the number one risk that we don't have a choice that we have to deal with at the moment. But when we start digging down further into it, I do think I think compliance is definitely a good one. Yeah, Julie, I think you pretty much you hit it pretty well on the head already. So you added to it loss of PII and data. Execution risk, I think, is potentially there as well. We've talked about that, and I think that if you are running your organizations the way you should already be running them, you should have somebody that's taking care of information security. This should already be well handled. They should be rightly concerned about how this is used, and I would encourage you to work with the appropriate people within your organization that you would be working with, even if we were sharing your data with a third party for doing some sort of fraud analysis or whatever it is. So I would follow the process there. I don't think there's anything new that needs to be put into place. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you for answering that, Dara. Adrian is asking, can the AI insight dashboards be set up to pull data from InfoSec or change management, which are not AI?
Can you expand upon that a little bit, Adrian? What do you mean pull data from InfoSec? If your question is, can they be data sources? Yes, of course. The examples that I gave can be pointed at any data source, and like I said, the there's now the opportunity more than before to look at unstructured data sources. So not only data that's sitting in, I mean, if your InfoSec, it may be a system that is keeping track of attempted breaches, then yes, you can point at that. If it's structured, if it's not structured, like call center audio, then there are tools that can take that and turn it into unstructured textual data that then a large language model can turn into structured data. So yeah, simply put, any of the data that you can access through a query, through Excel, through an extract, can be pulled in. If it's other data that's on a screen or in audio or in a text field in your core, that can go through a process and then put that in a database and then make that available. So yes, some of them, I think you can tell, some of them are easier to get at than others, but just about everything can be digitized and put into a form that you can then work with it in some way. If you recall the transaction coding example I gave, deals with some of the challenges there too, which is taking that data and turning it into and trying to turn it into something that's a bit more useful for classification purposes.
All right, Dara. Thank you for answering that for Adrian. I have one last question before we kind of close off since we're almost hitting time, and that is, Dara, are you AI? Who's to say? That phone call was pretty realistic. I don't know.
That's a good one. Yeah. If you're really into it, there was a Google thing that came up recently. They did an upgrade to their conversational chatbot that is audio, right? It's conversational. You can actually talk to it, and it will talk back. And it sounded like and what it did was it was able to take. So I remember I had an example about the documentation and turning that into something you can interact with. What it did was it took documentation and turned it into a podcast.
Yes, I have heard of
You've
that.
heard this.
It was wild.
Yeah, and then the podcast was these two presenters, a male and a female, but not. It's a computer and a computer, talking about whether they were AIs or not. And then they would even went into like, did you tell your wife that you suspect that you're AI? And he's like, well, no, because I don't have a wife because I'm not real. So it was like very interesting. So
It's almost crisis mode for the AI.
Well, yeah, I guess if it can have a
right, exactly.
mental breakdown. I don't know if that's possible, but maybe it is. Good question. Thank you.
Of course. Now with that, Dara, if you're all good, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up with our outro, get some people some last minute information.
Absolutely. Thanks, Cassie. Thanks, everybody.
Of course. So, all right, everyone, as we conclude, we do want to say a huge thank you to all of you who attended the webinar and asked questions as well. As I stated at the beginning of the webinar, we will be sending you all a digital recording of this call so that you can have it available to review. Also, if you had a question that did not get answered during the session, or if you simply want to discuss the topics of this webinar further with one of our experts, you can also answer yes to the poll that is on the screen right now, and one of our team members will reach out to you soon after the webinar. Feel free to also send our team an email at dfitzpatrick@trellance.com, and we'll get back to you in a timely manner. Thank you all again, and have a great rest of your day.
Take care.